Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, it was the tiniest glimmer of hope in the horror of the Syrian war, but the ceasefire between government forces and rebels in the city of Aleppo broke down just hours after it started. There have been reports of heavy shelling, gunfire and airstrikes on rebel areas. Buses which were due to take people out of the devastated rebel quarter have now left the area. Among those due to leave are 5,000 rebel fighters. But the Syrian government also wants its own injured fighters from nearby rebel-enclosed towns to be guaranteed a safe exit. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, reports.
A rare quiet became another day of war, shattering a ceasefire only hours after it started, and crushing a bit of hope that the agony of Aleppo was over. Especially for those still trapped in what's left of their homes in the east of the city.
Oh my God. All the people were, let's say, psyched and happy with the agreement about leaving and evacuating the city, finally. And they were just preparing themselves, and they think that the regime is going to take a ground force.
Good morning, my friends. Tens of shells are raining down on the besieged areas in Aleppo. There are injured in the field hospitals, injured as a result of the bombardment by the regime forces and allied Iranian militias.
And yet, before first light, the green government buses had pulled up to the edges of East Aleppo. That was the deal. They waited and waited. Rebel fighters and their families were to board these buses, bearing the flag and the face of the man they fought for 4 years, to be taken to an area still in opposition hands. But the deal brokered by Russia and Turkey broke down. President Assad's ally, Iran, imposed more conditions. This could take time. A people displaced and dispossessed are desperate to end this anguish. In recent weeks, more than 100,000 escaped the front lines of East Aleppo. Many did not. The UN is raising concern about alleged massacres of civilians by pro-government forces. A grave accusation dismissed today by President Assad.
If we liberate Aleppo from the terrorists, there would be, the Western officials and the mainstream media, they're going to be worried about the civilians. They're not worried when the opposite happens, when the terrorists killing those civilians.
His forces have their enemy cornered. But these latest pictures from the Syrian army show they're not yet ready to give up this fight. And the rebels are pushing back.
And we can talk to Lise in Beirut now. Lise, there must be even more concern for those thousands still trapped inside.
You know, it's hard, impossible even to talk about a humanitarian situation in an area where the UN has lamented there is a complete breakdown of humanity. This morning, as per the deal, the first ambulance is pulled up even before first light to the edge of that last of the rebel-held enclave where thousands are believed to be trapped. And they got ready to evacuate the first of the ill and the injured, but no sooner had they left than they were stopped at the first checkpoint manned by pro-government forces and told the deal has not yet been done. There had been such hope last night when the ceasefire was announced and a deal reached, it seemed, to evacuate the fighters, as well as the ill and the injured and the children, hundreds of children also believed to be trapped here. And now that hope is draining away as all of those vulnerable people and the thousands still believed to be trapped inside are still there, still living under the intense bombardment. And today there were also rockets and mortars fired into West Aleppo, taking more lives. Yet again, in Syria's war, when the shots are fired, it's the civilians who pay the price. And in Syria, it's an extraordinarily heavy price.
Lise, thank you very much.
So, with the breakdown of the ceasefire, thousands of civilians are still trapped in the nightmare that is rebel-held Aleppo, an ever-shrinking enclave where the shelling has barely paused, where witnesses say bodies still lie in the streets. Crowds of civilians were waiting for buses out of the city when fighting resumed this morning. Tonight, Russia and Turkey have agreed once again to start the evacuation as soon as possible. But I must warn you, there are some distressing scenes in Jonathan Rugman's report.
Yesterday's ceasefire, brokered by the Turks, broke down this morning. Eyewitnesses described airstrikes and dozens of artillery shells, trapping civilians as well as stopping rebel fighters from leaving.
عشرات القذائف كما قلنا قوات النظام تقوم باستهداف الأحياء الأربعة أحياء أو الخمسة أحياء التي لا تزال.
As you see, a lot of people are waiting in front of the hospital.
Last night, our camera woman, Wad Al-Khatib, filmed from a hospital roof injured civilians waiting to be evacuated. In fact, nobody here escaped. After a 4 to 5 hour wait at a checkpoint, they were sent back here this morning when the ceasefire ended. These the survivors of what the UN describes as extremely heavy government bombardment in areas packed with ordinary people.
شو صار معكم اليوم؟
نزلت غالي البناية كلها على أبو فوقنا. ماتوا 6 من عائلتي والباقي كلها مسقطنا. طيب عنا الأولاد ما لنا غير الله يطلع عليهم. لا عنا بيت، لا عنا بصرات، لا عنا شيء.
اليوم عملنا من امبارح لهلا نطلع من هون. ما بعرف أمر الدولة مشان إيش ما بعرف. هلا شوفت علينا عم بضربوا كل الصواب المستشفى كلها.
Around 20 government buses sent to evacuate sit tantalizingly close. Their lights flashing, their engines running, plastered with pictures of a president whose forces, the UN says, probably committed war crimes today. Those crimes, ironically, against his own missing passengers. Mr. Assad himself has told Russian television the West's calls for a ceasefire here are nothing more than an attempt to save terrorists.
The translation of their statement is for Russia, please stop the advancement of the Syrian army against the terrorists. That's the meaning of that statement. Forget about the rest. You went too far in defeating the terrorists. That shouldn't happen.
Last night, these Islamic Front fighters were still holding out in the east of the city, singing, "We will stay here despite the pain." Sunni militants have themselves prevented civilians from leaving. And it was last week's jihadist offensive on 2 Shia villages, Fua and Kafraya, which is being blamed by Syrian government forces for the ceasefire breaking down. Syria's backer, Iran, said it wanted to evacuate the injured from here simultaneously. But this rural battleground is now central to Syria's revolution, and the rebels refused. In Aleppo, that revolution is surely in its final hours. Rebel shelling has killed at least 6 people today, but the Russians are predicting this battle will be over in the next 2 to 3 days, while Iran's president has already sent his message of congratulations to Mr. Assad.
Jonathan Rugman. Earlier I spoke to Zuhair El-Shamali, a citizen journalist in the last rebel-held enclave in Aleppo. I started by asking what had happened there since we spoke on this program last night.
From yesterday night until now, the plans was about to let the injured people to get out from the city towards the countryside and then to Turkey to get treatment at 5 a.m. But there was some delay. The cars of that were carrying the patients and the injured people were forced by the Iranian militias that were at the checkpoints in the regime area, who have harassed them and asked them and forced them to go back to the east. The artillery bombs have just started to hit the city from the morning, and it went like kind of in escalations levels, hour after an hour. Bombs have started to hit the city very crucially and making a hell of destructions and injuries during between the people who are overcrowding in the east of Aleppo.
Zahir, what is the situation now? No new talks, presumably, no new option for some kind of ceasefire, right?
Not at all. We haven't got any information about any new set of agreements.
How many people are now back with you? The same number, 60,000?
No one have left ever, so the amount of people is still like around 6 people. We don't know how many people were injured today, how many people were killed, or how many people are trapped under the rubble.
Any hope at all, any hope for a ceasefire?
Yes, of course. As long as we are alive here, as long as there is people living here, staying, and they are holding on, and they haven't died yet, including me. So we will just keep hope for a cessation. I just think as long as I'm alive, there is some hope, and we can end from this war.
Zahir, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, a few moments ago, France turned off the lights on the Eiffel Tower in a symbol of solidarity with the Syrians in Aleppo, a symbol too, perhaps, of the West's sheer impotence in the face of what is happening. Before we came on air, I spoke to Britta Hagi Hassan. He's the mayor of East Aleppo, who is currently in Paris and is asked to address the EU Council tomorrow. He told us of his fears for the coming hours.
Tonight, 50,000 people are expecting death to come at any moment. They are waiting to be butchered if the regime advances or storms the area. Whoever survives the bombing will be butchered because of the advance of the Iranian and Iraqi militias, which are committing atrocities in the areas they are capturing. Everyone is in a state of extreme fear and panic about what's happening. They are expecting to be butchered and women to be raped because the same regime who killed 500,000 people during the revolution will not be afraid to do that now, especially given the silence of the international community. We call urgently for a ceasefire to evacuate the civilians out of Aleppo. Every hour that passes is worse than the previous one. They are not expecting to live to see tomorrow.